I'm delighted to be joined here on the Celtic Exchange once again today by Greig Robertson. Some folk might remember Greig from an episode that he done a couple of years back now. Greig, as he'll go into, I'm sure, is a very experienced coach, coached at the Celtic Academy for some years, and now finds himself in Boston, coaching over there at the Boston Bolts. Greig, great to have you back on. How's things today?
Fantastic, Tino, and absolutely delighted to be invited back on. Been following the podcast and the WhatsApp group chat, which is lively at times, but thoroughly enjoy keeping abreast of everything that's going on back home.
Nice one, mate. So before we get fully started, could you tell us a wee bit about where you find yourself, over at Boston these days, and your background, Greig, at Celtic, for anyone who doesn't yet know that?
Yeah, certainly, Tino. So my current role here at Boston Bolts, we're a fairly large youth football club here, based in Boston. We probably have about 2,500 registered players, over 100 coaches, spread out across the whole state of Massachusetts. And my role as technical director at the club is to try and make improvements across all areas that affect the on-field processes. So try to develop the coaches, develop the players, develop the teams, and everything that surrounds that. Been here now just a little over 3 years. Landed in Boston in January 2022 after spending 18 years at Celtic in the academy and working with every age group from U11s all the way through to my last kind of 4 or 5 years working with the under 18s at the club, and had some wonderful experiences. Worked with some great staff, worked with some fantastic young players, young people at the time who are now, playing for our own first team or first teams elsewhere, or back in the game in some other capacity. So yeah, a great time at Celtic. Look back with incredibly fond memories, and gave me such a fantastic education at the club, and hopefully I'm imparting some of that to my staff that are with me at the current role.
Yeah, you've obviously began that role at Celtic, Greig, early 2000s, and as you say, been there till around about 2022. Who would have been your own biggest influences on your own young coaching career?
Yeah, I started 2003, December 2003, and Martin O'Neill was the first team manager at the time, and Tommy Burns was the head of academy. And at that time, Martin was adamant in meeting personally all staff before they actually started. So I think at the time Celtic were involved in the Champions League, and there was midweek games, weekend games, and Tommy was trying to organise a meeting with Martin O'Neill to rubber stamp and to get the seal of approval. And it kind of get pushed back, and eventually we got a day, kind of mid-December, into the stadium. Met Martin O'Neill. I actually think they just lost in the Champions League the day before, which I was a little anxious about in terms of what mood he would be in. But I was so fortunate that my formative years as a coach, I was just surrounded by incredible people. Tommy Burns was, everybody's got a story about Tommy, and I'm actually fortunate that we have Tommy's son, Johnny, who works with me here at Boston Bolts, and has some incredible similar mannerisms and some of the same terrible jokes as well. But Tommy he just installed in you what it was to be, a Celtic person, about values, about how you conducted yourself, and he was never. At youth level, he was never phased about results at any level. It was about giving these young players a good experience, developing them as good football players, pushing them as hard as they can, and see where they go. So I was fortunate that we shared an office, myself, Tommy. There was also a guy, John Stevenson. John Stevenson was the academy manager at the time, and he managed all of the processes and the systems, and the education I learned from John in terms of how to manage people, manage staff, put processes in place. More of the off-field stuff. John has an incredible knowledge, and John went on to be academy managers and down south, and a huge wealth of knowledge. And I still keep in touch with John. And then probably kind of on the field when I'm a young coach, in the academy working with the youngest age groups. Martin Miller was in charge of the junior academy, and the way he dealt with the young players, the way he communicated with them, he made them all feel 10 foot tall. I mean, he gave pretty much everybody a nickname. When you hear KT now, that was probably didn't take a lot of time to come up with that nickname, but he just made the kids feel so valued, and the kind of structure of the training sessions, it was all about individual development. How do we improve individuals, and that came from Tommy as well. So kind of my formative years was just invaluable. Every day was like coach education. You get in, you're listening to Tommy, and Tommy was involved with the first team and academy, and his knowledge of the game was just incredible. And then John, from more an operationals, organisational management perspective, and then Martin, just being on the grass as a young coach, learning, was fantastic. And then through the years, I think all the Celtic managers had a real genuine interest in the academy, as you would probably imagine. Yeah, it's beneficial to them to try and have homegrown players come through and supplement the first team squad. So, Brendan Rodgers, first time around when I was still there, was a real influence on me personally. He would always take time out to ask about the team, the players, my own coaching, ask for ideas, suggestions. He's got a great way with people. Ronnie Dyler was an incredible coach on the grass. Was very much about developing players at first team level, continually improving them. Had some brilliant ideas in terms of coaching, and then Ange was so different in his approach to leadership and to managing, and it would be very, very difficult for Andy to try and replicate that leadership style. But was very distant with the players and staff. But everybody knew that he had their best interest and was wanting to try and push and drive and make improvements at all times. So, and I've probably missed a ton of people there, Tino, that I worked with coaches and support staff over the years. I was just, some wonderful people that I've worked with over those 18 years, and some brilliant people still at the club doing a great job.
Yeah, it sounds like a brilliant grounding, Greg, and obviously everyone will be familiar with the first team managers, but less so with the likes of Martin Miller and some of the other guys that you work with at academy level, but equally talented in their own right. Just in terms of those first team guys, though, and we'll go on to talk about Brendan Rodgers in a bit more detail just shortly. You spoke about Ronnie Dyler, very much a coach, and Ange very much a manager. What would you say are the key differences there which make Ange a manager and an absolute leader, and Ronnie talented on the training field, but maybe less capable, without being too harsh, to manage Celtic?
Yeah, I think with Ronnie, it was what he had previously done and where he came from. To come to a club like Celtic at the time that he came, the club like Celtic, there was a lot of change going on in Scottish football at the time. Maybe Ronnie and his support staff didn't really have that experience of that level and top level European competition. A brilliant developer of coaches, some great ideas. Spent a lot of time with the guys in the academy and sharing these ideas and philosophy. And I think with Ange was so clear on his ideas. Probably a lot more experienced when he came to Celtic in various roles. Had to deal with a lot of trials and tribulations over his own career and a lot of knockbacks and setbacks, which has probably given that real resilience and probably more determination. And having done, observed them in practice and done a bit of, reading and of books and listen podcasts, etc., about Ange. You know, he doesn't build personal relationships because his whole idea is that you're going to have to break bad news to somebody at some stage. You know, and he doesn't want to be sitting and have a coffee with somebody and then in the afternoon telling them, you know, you're not in the 18 for the weekend. So it is a very, very different approach. But that being said, you know, the players and staff absolutely loved Ange, and I generally do think it is very, very unique. Nobody could replicate it if that's not your natural leadership style. Then it would be so different. But just on the kind of continuing on the coaching staff, you know, that I think all of the, particularly Brendan, you know, brought with him, particularly the first time, some brilliant staff with him. Chris Davies, you know, one of his coaches, who's now first team manager at Birmingham, was absolutely brilliant. I was fortunate to spend a bit of time with Chris, just, you know, talking football over a tactic board and, you know, gleaning some ideas and information from him. And probably the constant over the last kind of few managers has been John Kennedy. And John, I remember a while back whenever Celtic conceded from a corner kick, it was John's fault for being the set play coach or the defensive coach. But John's role at the club is, you know, can't be underestimated. You know, you don't stay and be a real prominent, you know, member of the first team coaching staff with several managers if you don't add real value and real quality. And John's attention to detail is absolutely magnificent. And again, kind of came through Top End Academy. He coached at the development squad, done a bit of scouting, and then got an opportunity at first team. And he's been pivotal. I genuinely believe, knowing John's, you know, background, his knowledge, you know, how much he puts into analysing opposition, preparing for sessions, etc. John absolutely deserves a huge amount of credit for the success of the team, particularly just now.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of John Kennedy, and I'm pleased that he's stuck around and he's been the constant, as you say, throughout various managers. Do you see him potentially, either at Celtic or otherwise, stepping out on his own and testing those skills? Is that an itch he'll be keen to scratch?
I'm sure he probably wants to be his own man. I'm fairly sure he'll have quite a lot of autonomy at the club just now in terms of preparing and delivering the training sessions. He'll have a huge say on game plan, along with Brendan. But it's probably not the same as being, you know, the guy. And I'm sure he has huge ambitions of being a first team manager at some stage. I don't think it's out without the realms of possibility that he becomes Celtic manager at some point in his career, and I would absolutely love to see that.
Yeah, as would I. So we'll keep a close eye on that one as that develops. Before we get to something I'm really keen to discuss, Greg, and it's, you know, Celtic at this moment in time, how Brendan Rodgers plays, why he plays in a certain way, the different demands on his players. Just before we break into that, I'd be keen to ask your own, are the teams and the coaches that you admire in the modern game just now, whether it's in Scotland or beyond, you know, but who do you like and why in terms of styles of playing and what they're doing?
Yeah, I think I mean, massive Guardiola fan. I think the interesting thing is going to see, you know, how he reinvents the team for next season. They've obviously struggled this year. They've had some bad injuries to key players, which has affected their team. They always operate with a relatively small squad, so the top ones are playing, and they have that kind of bounce, you know, Wednesday, Saturday, or whatever it may be. I just think he's revolutionised the game, you know, and I don't think that the season that they're having just now is any slight on him as a coach. I think I always enjoy watching Man City, and it'd be interesting to see how they adapt and evolve for next season, which new tactics he deploys and how he molds that team. I watched the Madrid derby yesterday, and it's certainly not my preferred style of play, but I've got massive respect for Simeone and the way he sets up his team and organises his team. I mean, it's defensive masterclass. He puts on and absolutely wears his heart on his sleeve, and it's absolute polar opposites when you look at that touchline yesterday with Ancelotti, the quiet man, calm, collected, and Simeone whipping up the crowd every 10 seconds. So, I think that there's probably so much to be appreciated about the modern day game and different styles. And we look down at the Premiership just now. Some clubs are doing fantastic. Bournemouth, Nottingham Forest, and again Nottingham Forest, they sit in a kind of medium low block, soak up pressure, defend incredibly well. Centre backs have been absolutely fantastic for them, and hit with absolute blistering pace on the counter attack. So there's a ton. I would probably say Guardiola would be certainly the most kind of influential coach on me and how. And I think at youth level, I think I'm a big believer. I think we need to try and play attractive football at youth level, and as opposed to playing the Simeone way, where it's almost anti-football and you're trying to squeeze out a 1-0 win. So I think if I had my way, every day we would try and adopt the open free-flowing football at youth level, and I think the results are very much secondary.
Yeah, we might get to a question towards the end of the piece about any changes you might make to the modern game if you had the ability to do so. Greig, before we kick on, just with a chat on Brendan Rodgers and the current Celtic, as I mentioned, what's your own coaching credentials? What's your level of qualification at this moment in time?
I've got UEFA Pro license. I also have a master's degree in performance coaching, and I'm currently just undertaking a course with US Soccer to hopefully become a coach educator with US Soccer over here. So I'm quite interested in the coach education, coach development space right now. So that's the credentials.
You never knew you were stepping on for a job interview today and getting collared there. But no, you've passed the test and we can now continue with the rest of the recording.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate that.
Now that you've confirmed. So just on that, Greig, you've mentioned that you've worked under Brendan Rodgers. I know you're a huge fan of what he does. Can you give us, first of all, a quick insight into how he works and what makes him such an elite level coach?
Yeah, I think probably first and foremost, I think probably similar to Ange, I think the clarity in his thoughts and way that you want to play, and having that luxury as well of having real quality players in your team, where certainly domestically you are going to be dominant, you are going to be on the front foot, and you can play a fairly consistent style of play. I think he has changed and adapted since his first time round to the team that we have just now. Formations, we might touch on that later. Formations are one thing, but his first time round he was certainly more a 4-2-3-1 kind of guy with that down that left hand side with Scott Sinclair not being an out and out winger coming inside, almost being a double 10 with Rogic and Kieran Tierney battering down that touchline and getting on the last line, putting crosses in, allowed him to get the numerical advantage in the middle of the park and get 4 in there. This time round it's more a 4-3-3 with 1 6 and 2 8s. But again, if you look at it, he's always looking to try and find ways to create that numerical superiority in the middle of the park. Probably something that Ange brought in first with inverted fullbacks. I think you still see it now with Brendan's team. Greg Taylor certainly probably more comfortable coming inside, playing in those little inside pockets than maybe Alistair Johnston's, maybe more a traditional fullback, getting an overlap, underlap in the final third. So different ways to skin a cat, but it's fairly similar in terms of structure, where he kind of boxes out that midfield. We're creating an overload with a winger or a fullback coming inside. But in terms of him, I think his attention to detail, what he's planning, fortunate in his first time round to sit in some staff meetings to see the plan and the preparation that goes into literally writing out a training session, with different coloured pens and the minute detail. It is organised to the nth degree. The support staff he has around him, in terms of how they structure the season, the months, the weeks, the days, how long each activity's run. The detail would blow your mind. And I said the staff around them that helps to deliver that plan. So I think the way that he deals with not just the players, but the staff, he just has an incredible way about him and making everybody feel massively valued. I remember one time I was sitting at Lennoxtown and at the hot desk, and he called me into his office for 5 minutes to show something on the tactic board. Now he wasn't really seeking my advice or input, I'm fairly sure, but those 5 minutes that he afforded me, made me feel hugely valued, and I felt as if I was contributing something towards the kind of greater good. And at the time he was walking down the corridor with Stuart Armstrong with his arm around him, and I think Stuart Armstrong was hitting a bit of form in terms of goal scoring, and I was walking towards the two of them, and he's like, "Greg, have you met Stuart before?" And I was like, I've met Stuart." And he said, "No, this is the new Stuart. Stuart's scoring goals now, and Stuart Armstrong was a grown man, everybody knows, really educated guy, but he had this huge smile on his face. And I think sometimes that's kind of missing. His interpersonal skills, knowing how to communicate with people, knowing what to say, brilliant way with words. That kind of his, qualification in neuro-linguistics. He knows what to say, when to say it, and how to make people feel. And then his own kind of intrapersonal skills. He knows himself. He knows his qualities. He knows his strengths, and he has people around him that play off that. So, a brilliant leader.
It's brilliant to hear that. It's brilliant to hear about the attention to detail stuff, and just on that. So, again, we most of us outside looking in terms of how that all works, and you'll hear a Brendan Rodgers in a post-match press conference where he'll say, one game at a time. We're not looking as far ahead as cup finals or whatever's down the track. It's all about the next game. Now, he'll say that, of course, but what you're saying there leads me to believe that, as much as the focus might be on the here and now in that weekend's game, he's only too well aware of the fact that he'll have 6 games the following month, and he'll need to manage his squad accordingly, and there might be some rest and recovery required, and then there's international breaks and so on and so forth. Does he look really to the end of the season and beyond, Greg, in terms of how he plans and structures the day-to-day?
Yeah, I'm absolutely sure that he will, Tino. And he'll work his way back. He'll look at certain fixtures where, he can maybe do a little bit of squad rotation, and give players, game time. It's a tough job. You look at the first team squad right now. There really is 2 quality players for almost every position, and it's challenging to keep them match fit, to keep them happy, and I think that's where planning, preparing in advance comes into play, and I think he does a fantastic job at that, and he does. He needs to recite that to the players. The players need to know the next game's the most important game, whoever it may be, whether it be a Scottish Cup game, 3rd rounds, or whether it be, Champions League knockout game. The next game is the most important one. It's the only one they can influence. So, but the staff in the background will be looking at games coming up. They'll be looking at physical loads and players, and that's where guys like Glenn Driscoll and the sports science team will come into play, monitoring training loads, game loads, when players need a rest. There's so much data that's collected on these players nowadays, physical data, tic-tac data, where they can really monitor, evaluate, and maybe see when some interventions need to come into place, and just, whether it's resting Callum McGregor for the last 30 minutes of a game, or, resting Alistair Johnson and bringing in a more than abled replacement in Tony Ralston. So that's, the detail is nowadays, I think, is incredible, and I think it helps with so much data and information that the guys can rely on. And
I think the manager's always keen, when given the opportunity, to reference those guys in the background. The Glenn Driscoll that you mentioned, sports science and various guys behind the scene, Gavin Strachan, Adam Sadler, is it?
Yep.
for example, all these guys, John Kennedy, of course, and various others that he now relies on. And he is quick to praise those guys when given the opportunity. Just in terms of the 11 on the pitch, Greg, you mentioned that, first time around it was a 4-2-3-1. It's now very much this 4-3-3. And I'm keen for your thoughts on the specific requirements and demands on those individuals within that system. You mentioned that he plays with a 6 and 2 8s. And for anyone that's not sure of that terminology, the 6 would be the defensive midfielder, Callum McGregor, more often than not. The 2 8s is your Rio Hatate and your Arne Engels, for example. But what's Brendan Rodgers' key objective when he sets up in that 4-3-3 offensively? Is it get it wide and get in behind? Is it to play through the middle? What's his focus within that system?
Yeah, I think he always he just wants to dominate every phase of the game. Like, it'll kill him having seen the opposition with the ball at all. So I think he refers to intensity. He refers to speed and ball recoveries, etc. So I think and listen, things might have changed second time around, and I'm just observing like everybody else from the outside looking in. I'm watching games on television now, and I don't have the good fortune even of being in a stadium to watch games live, but certainly first time around, I even remember he referred to the centre backs as feeders. Their jobs as feeders, and just make things really, really clear. Like, your job's fairly simple. You feed the guys in front of you. You feed a Cal McGregor. You feed a fullback who maybe comes inside. You feed a number 8. So that was their jobs to build the play. And then the guys in the middle of the park, as I said earlier on, you're always looking to try and overload those central areas and look to try and progress possession and create chances. And then very keen for guys in the last line to be occupying the opposition last line and trying to stretch and unbalance the last line with runs in behind. And I think you can see, there's absolute speed on that last line. It's a prerequisite, for a player on that Celtic team. Whoever plays on that last line is causing absolute chaos. And I think that speak about formations, that I don't think, for me anyway, I don't think formations are as important as maybe some people make out formations to be. I think it's literally where you stand for kickoff, and then the game starts, and it becomes so fluent. And I think in the modern day game, I think there has to be a real level of tactical flexibility. That if you look at Celtic, even now, they might set up a 4-3-3, but they might press in a 4-diamond 2. They'll have different shapes for different moments of the game, and they will be flexible. And that's the level of detail and organisation which is done up at Lennoxtown Monday to Friday, and then we see the game at the weekend. And you look when, particularly Celtic play at home domestically, it's like a 2-3-5 or a 2-2-6 that they'll play. There'll be the 2 centre backs, and the 2 centre backs will be almost 40 yards from the opposition goal. So when you look at kind of individual player requirements and player qualities, your centre backs need to absolutely have speed in the recovery, because Celtic are trying to break down 11 grown men 18 yards from their own goal, when the opposition, as soon as they win the ball, they've got 3/4 of the pitch that they can go and counter-attack in, and they just need to get lucky once, where Carter Vickers and Trusty need to get it right every time. So it is challenging, but that's what I think. Formations are one thing, and I think when the game's so fluid now, so 4-3-3, Greg Taylor comes inside, it becomes a 3-box-3. So what are Celtic playing? And then before you know it, Greg Taylor's now playing as a left-sided 8, and Hatate or Engels can run on the last line. So what's the formation look like then? It is so fluid. So I think it's more about principles, and that's what I think that Brendan won't change, and Ange absolutely didn't change, and it's not changing at Spurs. Is you have your principles of play, you have your sub principles. This is how we attack, this is how we defend, and these are the transitional moments, and this is what's required from us. The formation can change within that, but the principles don't. So, and I think now you look at the makeup of the first team squad, and the players that are in it. I think that 4-3-3 it does as a starting base for a shape. I think suits fantastically well with the players and the kind of key qualities that players have within the squad.
Yeah, I was just thinking of a quote there. It's a Mike Tyson quote. Not often I'll quote him on this show, but I think it's the whole thing about everyone's got a plan until someone punches you in the face, and then it all changes. And you can have your plan against Bayern Munich, and then something can change within the first few minutes, and you need to adjust, and you need to show some flexibility. But that's where those principles would remain true, but you can stay flexible in terms of your shape or whatever within that. When you talk about 3-box-3, for example, Greg, the box is a box of 4 in the midfield then, so 3 defenders, a box of 4, and then 3 attackers ahead. Is that what that means?
Yeah, it would be, Tino. And that's where, Brendan's always, certainly first time around, and you can see it now the second time around, trying to create more numbers in there than the opposition. How can we outnumber them? How can we find a spare man? And more often than not, right now, it's with one of the fullbacks coming inside. Previously, when Greg Taylor was playing in the team, I thought Greg Taylor wasn't adapted incredibly well to that when Ange first came, and it was about inverted fullbacks, and he struggled initially because it's a whole different dimension perspective for you. Generally, when you're a fullback, the centre back will feed you, you'll open up, and you've got to pass down a line to play. Whereas now they're asking the fullbacks to come inside, receive it with back to play, or receive it on the turn and play forward passes. I just think Greg Taylor almost at times had a free role in the team. He would be a traditional left back. He would be a left-sided 6. He'd be a left-sided 8, and then before you know it, he was a left winger on the last line. And as you can probably hear, Tino, I set up the Boston Greg Taylor Celtic Supporters Club over here. I thought the role he done for the team in terms of creating a little bit of chaos, and that it's difficult to defend against that, because the moment the fullback comes inside, if the winger comes all the way in with him, then maybe I trust he's got a direct pass right onto the winger, our winger on the last line. If the opposition winger doesn't follow a Greg Taylor or a fullback inside, then we've automatically got 2 6s. And if they're pressing with 110, then they can't pick up both. If they're pressing with 2 number 8s up against their 2 6s, we've got a spare one on the next line. We've got 2 8s playing against one of their 6s. So it was always about trying to find overloads. How can we find overloads? How can we progress possession? So I think that the kind of tactical flexibility is critical in the modern day game.
Yeah, absolutely, and I do understand your support. You Gregs have got to stick together, and I'm sure you'll be backing him as long as he remains at Celtic. You mentioned the word intensity, Robbo, when you were talking about things there, and you can see that. Anyone observing Celtic can see that intensity. But just on that note, how demanding can that be for the players, both physically, the physical intensity, but mentally? You need to be switched on for every minute, every second, actually, of every game. Otherwise, you could fall short. How demanding can that be on the players?
Yeah, I think it can be, Tino, but I think they are conditioned to that way. I think they are mentality monsters. They live and breathe that every day at training, and I think it comes from the environment, the culture that's set at training every single day. Some of the toughest sessions they'll have in the week, including the match day, will be training games up at Lennoxtown, whether it be small-sided games or medium-sized games, whatever they're doing. They'll go hell for leather, and all those durations and spaces and everything will be managed and controlled by Glenn Driscoll and his guys to make sure that they are in peak physical condition to match the demands of the modern day game. But mentally, I mean, they are human beings as well, and I know after a couple of games, Brendan's come out and used that phrase that they are humans. It is difficult. And I remember the European game earlier on in the season, I think, where we had a missed penalty and 2 or 3 goals disallowed in the first half.
Young boys, yeah.
Young boys. I mean, 400 professional games under your belt or not, like, you go in at half time and you think, like, we've done everything. We've absolutely thrown the kitchen sink. And I mean, that night was one a bust, and the crowd were incredible, and the atmosphere and the intensity that the team were playing at, the quality that the team were showing, and they come in at half time 0-0. You know, so that's a huge mentality moment. You know, how do they stay positive? How do they stay focused? How do they stay on task? That, you know, chances will come again in the second half. You know, we just need to stick to the game plan. We need to be, you know, focus on the process. We focus on the process. We do the right things, and hopefully then we get the outcome. And obviously they did. So the mentality piece is a big one. And you know, you look at the leader of the team right now, Callum McGregor, and there's nobody with a better mentality. You know, that I can think of than that guy. I mean, he leads that team with intensity. You know, if they were playing a game of tiddlywinks, he'd be in about them in that huddle. You know, he's an absolute winner, and he won't settle for anything less than that from his teammates on the field, and they know that, and they probably, not probably, they've all bought into that, because they understand as well that, you know, that they can't drop standards. You know, there's 2-3 players for every position. There's real competition within the squad. So I think that competitive environment within the group, I think, fuels that mentality with them.
And just on Callum McGregor then, Greg, just to break off slightly, you worked with him. You can tell us in a second just how young Callum McGregor was when you started working with him, but did you see those qualities in him at a young age? Are those qualities that are just inbuilt in some players, you know, the leadership, the desire, the drive? Or are these things that he developed over the years, working with elite managers, working under Scott Brown and things like that? What did you see from the young Callum McGregor?
It's funny. I think he was maybe under 12s. Actually, I think it was under 13s. I worked with Callum, and it was myself and Owen Archdeacon, the dancer, the former winger for Celtic. Myself and Owen took that team that year. Callum was in it, and Callum was a good player. He was the hardworking. He was a hardworking kid, but never the top player within the group. And I'm sure he would probably say the same thing. You know, he was never the most talented. And there is this myth that, you know, that the talented players, the talent will get you in the building, you know, but your character, personality will keep you there. And I think that's been, you know, so evident with Callum, his own drive and determination. And I think the ones, through my experience at Celtic, the ones who are either currently in Celtic's first team or doing incredibly well elsewhere have probably been dealt some setback along the way, and they've had to really develop resilience and almost you know, I'll show you. You know, Cal McGregor down on loan at Notts County, you know, probably on his way out the club, you know, down at Notts County to try and get some first team game experience, and comes back and gets an opportunity under Ronnie Dyler. Tony Ralston, similar, you know, loans at Queen's Park, Dundee United, no real future. Tony, albeit, you know, he's maybe playing back up just now to Alistair Johnson, but, you know, a mainstay in that squad, but had to deal with that. James Forrest wasn't given a professional contract when all his teammates were at kind of U16, U17 level. He was on expenses, and again developed that, you know, I need to work harder than everybody else now, you know, and sometimes it's the ones who you know, only rely on talent that catches up. That catches up at some point. And I know Brendan actually talks about the silver medalist, which I absolutely love. You know, it's a silver medalist, the one that's second or playing back up to somebody that ends up, you know, coming through at the end. And Kieran Tierney, you know, I watched an interview recently with Kieran Tierney. Kieran was third choice left back at under 20s. Like, we're talking one stage away from the first team. Like, he wasn't a kid. You know, he had Callum Waters and he had Aidan McElduff in front of him at left back, and he gets his opportunity to train with the first team because the development squad had played the night before, and the first team needed a couple of bodies to train. And he goes up and he makes a massive impact with his intensity and his character and personality, and Scott Brown loves him, puts an arm around him, and he stays in there. So before you know it, you're third choice left back for the under 20s, and then you're in the first team squad. So the opportunities come probably when the most probably when they don't expect them to come. And for the young players, they need to be prepared at every single opportunity. I think the young players now, they feel as if, everything's going to be perfect. Everything will be perfect. I'm just going to bounce from one age group to the next age group to the next age group, and then I'll be, in the B team, and then I'll make my first team debut. It doesn't happen like that. It doesn't happen. So I think that, you look at the ones that have, performing for our first team just now, as I said, somewhere else, they've all had a bit of a kind of hard luck story and a bit of a, I'm going to stick two fingers up and prove everybody wrong here. And I think there's a lot to be looked into and researched into that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about the the silver medal analogy, which I like. Even KT, he's bronze medal at one point. He's having to skip by a couple of guys to make it, and look what he's going on to become. And we'll get to KT just towards the end of the piece. I'm really excited about his return. I'm sure you are as well, and what he can give to this Celtic side. I also very much buy into the fact that anybody within the academy, as you'll absolutely vouch for, Robbo, they've got talent. They've all got talent, otherwise they wouldn't be there. But the guy, I remember hearing Brendan Rodgers speaking just a couple of weeks ago about Jude Bonner. Now, I don't know enough about Jude Bonner, whether he'll make it or not, but Brendan Rodgers was quick to credit the fact that he's working extra hard in the gym and that he's clocked that, he's observed that. So, Jude Bonner at the moment has an opportunity. He's got talent. He's caught the eye of the manager, but he's also putting in the minutes and putting in the hours behind the scenes to make sure that if the chance comes, and that's always a big if as well, sometimes it doesn't come, but if it comes, he's as ready as he'll be to go and take it. And good luck to Jude and various others try to make their way through. Robert, just to bring it back very briefly again to Brendan and what he's doing with the current setup. We've spoken about the various demands on the players, how he wants to play, the physical demands, the mental demands. What won't he tolerate though? What won't he stand for in terms of the response he gets from some players? Is he the kind of guy that you could see being ruthless if he needed to be?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think you quite often see the big smile, and that kind of side of him. But yeah, I mean, these guys don't have these sort of roles and that. You have a career. If you're not ruthless, you'll do what he thinks is absolutely best for the team. He won't stand for lack of intensity at training or in games. One of his. I remember, I think he was watching one of the B team sessions and speaking to some of the young players and telling them, if you don't run forward if you're not prepared to run back, so like that mentality. And then when sometimes young players, particularly forward ones, think they only have to work, one side of the ball, and it's all about what they can do when they land on it. But that's certainly not the case. And you look at the ones that play in the front line for Celtic just now, Maeda, Kieran, Jota, they work as hard as any, on transitional moments and coming back the field. And I think that's, and going back to kind of his team and the setup and the tactics, and he speaks a lot about that counter-pressing moment, where you see Celtic, they do recover the ball very high up the pitch, particularly home domestically when teams are camped in and there's not a lot of space for the opportunities for the opposition to counter attack. But the really only way you can effectively counter press is if the team's well organised defensively, and they have loads of players connected to one another and good spacing around the ball, that they, as soon as they give the ball away, come back to the mentality piece. As soon as they give the ball away, they know first step towards the ball, counter press, win the ball back, launch another attack. So that's probably a principle or a sub principle that he wouldn't tolerate. Not counter pressing, closest guy to the ball. And again, that'll all be driven from activities and games they'll do at the training ground.
Yeah, and it's just really interesting to hear that side of things. But you can see it played out. We can have these discussions and theorize about different things, but we can see it playing out in front of us. And I suppose nobody epitomizes this Brendan Rodgers side better than Daizen Maeda and the work that he's doing. Yep. Just quickly on that, actually, a lot of folks, Daizen Maeda has changed. He's evolved since he arrived at Celtic under Ange 3 years or so ago. Do you believe that Brendan Rodgers' influence has also made him the more composed finisher that he is, and the more rounded footballer than he maybe was when he first came in the doors?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the guys will all work on stuff after training. They'll do extras after training. I know that when the main body of the training's finished. I know years ago, the last whistle goes at the last game at training, and Cal McGregor would shout, "Champions do more," and they would all break off into little groups, so they would all go and do their individual stuff, and that's when a lot of the coaches come into play. Then Gavin Strachan's, Big Kendo, Adam, they'll work with units, they'll work with individuals, and I think it's so evident that the guys have been working incredibly hard with Eisen and his technique. He's touching 30 goals now. For somebody who started off the sides, and I know he's kind of transitioned a little bit to go through the middle, which was maybe more forced than design, but yeah, the guys will all work in individual development plans, whether they're formal or informal, but at the end of training, and again, they'll have created that kind of formal culture, when training's finished, right, lads, get yourselves inside, that, they'll not want to, they'll want to do more, they'll be so driven, now, and that'll filter throughout the whole group. So it's, yeah, Dyson has been incredible this season. And again, you don't play centre forward for Japan if you're not a decent centre forward. He's just maybe not the more stereotypical centre forward that you think about. And also he's played all his days as a wide player. But he's so effective. Like you can't breathe for a second. If you're playing against that guy, he's getting you water in the brain.
Yeah, it's just brilliant to see from Dyson, and he's such a unique player, and he's having a brilliant season, and there's still a way to go. He's 27 goals for now, Robbo. Let's see how soon he hits 30 and beyond. I also really like the line you said, champions do more. Callum McGregor stuff.
Yep.
Is great to hear that kind of message. And last question on the first team for now. And as I say, hopefully this becomes semi-regular at least, Robbo, and we'll continue to do a few more of these throughout the season and beyond. But the last question is about the current Celtic side, bigger picture stuff. It's been a great campaign so far, some really exciting stuff. League Cup in the bag, league title just about there. Brendan Rodgers won't concede that, but just about there. And now in the semi-final of the Scottish Cup. Lots to look forward to. But the final question would be, what's required to take this Celtic side to the new level? Is there a player or an area of the park that would really help us kick on, or anything else in general that would take this team to the next level, in your opinion?
Yeah, I suppose it's defining what the next level is. That I think the God willing, the club acquire another treble this season. I think their progress in the Champions League has been incredible this year. I think that the team tactically has adapted and evolved to manage the demands. And I think when you look at the finances, you're comparing apples and oranges. When Celtic are competing in the Champions League now, I won't embarrass myself by trying to quote the numbers, but I think you get relegated from the English Premier League, you get 140 million. I'm not sure what the prize money is for winning the Scottish Premier League. So it is incredibly tough, and everybody associated with Celtic, will want the club to progress and to move forward. And they absolutely will, when they'll put resources and time and effort into progressing the club forward. I think it's, you go a whisker away from taking Bayern Munich to penalties. I think, and I'm not being pessimistic by saying that there's no more progression and development, because there absolutely will be. The coaches will get more out the current squad. They'll recruit well in the summer. I think probably what's missing is another number 9 to be included alongside Adam Ida in that depth chart. But whether on one of the wide areas, and they're now looking for a wide player, that's that's how they get, and where they probably see Dyson in the next few years. But I think that's probably the piece that's missing. I think if you were to create a graphic of the first team depth chart right now, I think it does look fairly healthy.
Mm-hmm.
It's challenging keeping all those players happy and content. I know there was a bit of chat yesterday about McCown and his role within the team.
Mm-hmm.
One I think he's hugely exciting, and I think he will contribute massively. Yeah, so I think it's for Celtic. It's learning from Champions League this year, but also taking massive confidence from what they've done in the Champions League this year. I think the new format helped as well. And then I think that the way they competed with Bayern Munich in both legs was absolutely incredible. So I think one or two more pieces into that. I mean, we speak about external players hopefully coming in to add to it. There are a few young players out on loan at various clubs right now who could make an impact to that first team depth chart. There's a couple out in Austria just now. I know like Dan O'Day who does a brilliant. I spent a couple of brilliant years with Dan, and I know he's transitioned into a new role, not coaching this season, but more looking at kind of player pathway and trying to bridge that gap between academy, B team, and first team, creating some partnerships and relationships. But Matty Anderson and Ben Summers, two fantastic talents. I mean, Matty Anderson is like a kind of young KT. He's got 3 lungs. Matty Anderson can run all day. A brilliant kid, technically very good. I know he came over with the first team to the US pre-season, got some minutes. Ben Summers, I think he actually played. He played a young Tommy Burns in the program that they made about Tommy's life. Ben Summers, just a beautiful football player, handles the ball so well, attacking number 8. So there's a couple of kids who'll come back in, I'm sure, in pre-season. The manager will get his eyes on, see if they can force their way into that first team squad. And Celtic fans love nothing more than one of their own being in that, whether it's a KT or a Cal McGregor or whoever it may be. Over the years of Steve McManus, having somebody that's come through the club, I think they can relate to them. And so I think, long-winded, Tino, I think we've come. I think the club's came a long way in the last couple of years, and particularly in Europe. And hopefully we can add 1 or 2 pieces and compete further again next year.
And it's really exciting to hear that, and it's great to hear about the youth guys coming through. We could record for 2 or 3 hours here, Rob, and look at the different young players and what the possibilities might be. But I'm glad you mentioned Matthew Anderson specifically, because some folks have suggested that he might be the perfect backup to KT moving forward. I know Jeffrey Schlupp's there just now. I think a lot of fans would love to see a local talent, and there's a lot of excitement around Matthew Anderson, Ben Summers, and a few others, and maybe we'll catch that in a future episode. In the meantime, Greg, thanks for all the insight there in terms of the first team and getting a bit of depth and giving your own experiences with Brendan Rodgers. We're going to finish, if you don't mind, with a wee bit of quick fire stuff. So just 3 very quick questions. And the first of which kind of leads on from the previous discussion there, but it's about KT and how big a difference. I've spoken about what Celtic need to kick on and what improvements might we need to make, but how big a difference, Greg, do you think KT will make to this current Celtic side?
Yeah, I think he'll have a massive impact. I think he'll just lift everything. He'll lift the group. I think the fans will get a massive kick out of him coming back. I think what he's probably learned down south, he'll have improved and refined his own game. We might see the team playing slightly differently. I think KT, for me anyway, is that more traditional fullback, where he does get up on the outside. He can get himself on that last line, putting in crosses, playing inside, and probably more so in the final third, maybe making underlapping runs, crosses, cutbacks. So I think he'll make a massive impact. And it's brilliant seeing one of the homegrown kids, coming through, playing so many games for Celtic, having an incredible move and all the riches of the Premier League that comes with that, and then coming home. I think it's a brilliant story, and he's such a a humble kid. You know, I think everybody's seen the clips of him coming off the team bus with a Tesco bag, but that's not for cameras whatsoever. Like he's not involved in all of the circus that surrounds it. You know, the most grounded family. And that probably again helps and supports the kind of pathway of these young players. Cal McGregor's dad, incredible guy. Matt, just brilliant, down to earth. And look at all the probably kids who have came through the academy. You know, they've got brilliant help and support from family and friends around them. And so I think KT is. I think I've no doubt he'll light up the place. And he'll hopefully get himself back on that megaphone and gives us a couple of songs.
Yeah, a lot of excitement around KT's return. Can't wait to see him back in a Celtic shirt. Last two questions, Robbo. Question one, if you had a magic wand, what's the one thing you'd change about the modern game?
I'd scrap VAR in a heartbeat.
Really?
It does my head in. Tino, absolutely does my head in. I just there's kind of I think football was always built. I'm a bit of an old. I'm getting the beard's getting greyer by the day, and I'm getting old and grumpy. But football was once like it was the same the world over. It was, you know, there was a pitch. There was 11v11, a ball, 2 goals, officials, and we played. Now it's a little bit haves and have-nots. You know, there's VAR in some competitions. There's no VAR. If you can fund it, that's great. If you can't, so I don't think it creates a level playing field. But probably the biggest thing about the VAR is these linesmen, you know, putting the flag up, you know, 20 minutes after they're offside. Everybody can see it. Everybody knows he's offside, but you still need to keep playing. The ball goes out, and then the flag goes up, and then the game's restarted. I think football's just a game where it's won and lost in human error. Some players, managers make wrong team selections, wrong changes, and officials make wrong decisions at times. I just goal line technology. That's black and white, but VAR still, like, it goes to the guys in the VAR box. And my God, like they're debating and they've got 100 angles and they still don't get it right. So, like, just let the guy in the middle get it right or wrong. That's my take.
Yeah, and I don't think you're alone in that, to be honest with you. A lot of folks would be fully behind that, scrapping VAR. Last question, Robert, before we round things off. And I don't know how quickly you'll come to this answer. You've worked with a lot of talented young players, particularly Celtic, and I'm sure there's talented young kids in the Boston Bolts Academy as well. But put simply, who's the most talented player you've worked with?
I think probably going back to the earlier conversation, I think talent, you know, when I think of talent, it's probably the ones that come into the building. Initially, they're probably brought into Celtic because they've caught somebody's eye. So it's probably more the forward players. Islam Feruz, who obviously went to Chelsea and whatever, was incredible as a young kid. Was incredible. He had pace to burn. He could finish. Was huge talent. Karamol Dembele was probably the most technically gifted player I've seen at youth level. I mean, that little kid he was playing, I think, 2 years up at Celtic throughout the whole academy, and he would get kicked up and down the pitch, but he had an incredible attitude. He just got himself up, dusted himself down. He was he was a massive game changer, that little guy. There was a kid, and I think he's actually still doing the rounds now, Eamon Brophy, centre forwards, left Celtic. I think he went to Hamilton, maybe St Mirren, Ross County. I'm not sure where he had Kelly for a little while. Brophy, when he was a young kid at Celtic, he was prolific. I mean, he scored 100 goals in one season, and I think he made a bet with his dad that if he scored 100 goals, he'd get a dog. And when he scored the 100th goal, all the kids were down on their hands and knees, like being dogs. And sure enough, the dad bought him a dog, and he called it Hoopy. Brophy was probably the most just instinctive goal scorer I think I've ever seen at youth level. But maybe one of the most talented and somebody who's playing at a real high level now is probably the kid Aaron Hickey, who's at Brentford just now. Aaron came to Celtic, I think, at under 12s from Hearts. And I worked with Aaron, I think, from maybe under 13s to under 16s. And probably the most two-footed player I've ever seen in my life. Like, I think for a long spell, everybody thought he was left-footed. He was a left back. Like, he's a right footer. And then there was the debate about Scotland, and there's already Kieran Tierney and there's Andy Robertson. How do you get him in the team? And I'm thinking, well, he's a right footer. We don't have a right back. Just play him at right back. When he was at Celtic, he played more as an attacking midfielder. But he was an absolute technician, and obviously got a huge move to Bologna from Hearts, and then Bologna to Brentford. So unfortunately, I think he's struggled a wee bit with injuries recently. But yeah, absolute technician of a player.
Yeah, good to hear, and interesting to hear maybe the lesser heard stories. Eamon Brophy, lots of folks maybe wouldn't be aware of his story. Some folks wouldn't have realised that Aaron Hickey was at Celtic at all, and maybe he's one of the ones that got aware of it. But listen, overall, some great insight. Really enjoyed it, Greg. Really enjoyed getting your own backstory, just a refresher on that, getting your insights on Brendan Rodgers and loads of other things. And as I said, hopefully it's something we can do again. But in the meantime, thanks for today, and I'll catch you soon.
Pleasure, Tino. Thanks, mate. See you back.